I'm just asking you what it says.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
I'm going to give the Constitution to my aide. He'll bring it over to you so you can have it for future reference. I think it's something that every American should know what the Constitution says. Do you know who wrote the Fifth Amendment?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
So
Welcome back to Freedom Forge, the channel where we believe in faith, freedom, personal responsibility, and the constitutional values that have shaped the United States. If you enjoy in-depth analysis of congressional hearings, political accountability, and discussions about the biggest issues affecting America today, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest coverage. Today we're covering one of the most heated exchanges from a recent Senate hearing, where Senator Bernie Moreno questioned Dr. Anthony Fauci during testimony that quickly became one of the most talked about moments of the proceedings. The hearing focused on accountability surrounding decisions made during the COVID-19 pandemic, with lawmakers examining the long-term impact of public health guidance, government mandates, and the role of senior officials. Throughout the exchange, Dr. Fauci repeatedly invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination rather than answering Senator Moreno's questions, leading to an emotional and politically charged confrontation that has sparked debate across the country.
I'll echo Senator Johnson's comments about your opening statement, Mr. Chairman. I think it was dead on. Very, very well done. Mr. Fauci, do you know who David Schoen is?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. What does the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution say?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
No, I'm just asking you what it says.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
I'm going to give the Constitution to my aide. He'll bring it over to you so you can have it for future reference. I think it's something that every American should know what the Constitution says. Do you know who wrote the Fifth Amendment?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
So you're invoking a right that you don't know who wrote it or what it says. Is that correct?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Wow. All right, let me tell you who David Schoen is for the audience because he was ejected by the chairman. He's a high-profile criminal attorney. He's represented some really great people, like Senator Bob Menendez. Maybe that's somebody who my Democrat colleagues may remember took gold bars as bribes from the Egyptians. And there's an article here in the Washington Free Beacon that talks about why you would hire a guy like David Schoen. And the comment is, if you're in deep shit, that's who you call. Do you feel like you're in deep shit?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Clearly, what you think today is that somehow you're above reproach. Somehow you feel like you don't need to be treated like a normal American. Can you do me a favor in the audience and stand up if during the time of the COVID pandemic, you were called a racist for calling the virus a Wuhan virus or the China virus? If you thought the 6-foot rule was total crap, if you thought the vaccine wasn't something that you should take, if you thought it was outrageous the way the mask policy was rolled out, if you were fired from your job for not taking that vaccine, including members of the military, if you thought closing schools was catastrophically stupid, and that you thought that during these times saying these things made you somehow a lesser human being. Dr. Fauci, can you just turn around and look at the people behind you? You're not willing to do that? That's not a question. It's not a question. To your lawyers, not a question. It's a request. All you have to do is look up from your lawyers and look at the people who were absolutely shamed for saying what we know now to be the truth. You can't even look at them? That's a question. Are you able to look at them? You can sit down in the audience. There was a mom in Ohio during the depth of the coronavirus pandemic, decided to go to her high school football game for her son. They hadn't been out much. The kids had been learning at school, and then the school got shut down. They hadn't really gotten much out of that education. As any parent knew, that remote learning was no learning at all. But it was a Friday night. Her son wanted to go watch a buddy go play football. So they went to the stadium. They sat alone, far from everybody else, just a mom, a dad, a few kids. They didn't feel they needed to wear masks because it was stupid, because they were outside. They all live together. They're not near anybody. Dr. Fauci, do you know what happened to that mom and that family? That's a question.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
They were dragged out of that stadium and arrested. Those policies were put in place because you had moronic politicians that listened to the words of a megalomaniac who was more interested in having met a Kardashian than the suffering of the American people, and that is you. Your advice to communities like that, to idiotic politicians who enforce those rules, arrested that mom for watching a football game with her own family outside. When that story broke, I said to myself, I cannot stand idly on the side and watch this happen. It was about 6 years ago today that I decided I'm going to give up my businesses, sell them all, run for office, run for the United States Senate. Here I am sitting in front of you 6 years later saying, who the fuck do you think you were for doing that? It is a total disgrace what you did to this country. And if my Democrat colleagues are standing there defending you, I hope the voters of the United States of America watch the clips of every one of you doting on a guy who was more interested in being a celebrity than saving American people. I will make it my mission to make certain that every single one of those Democrats who did that will see that clip over and over and over again. Because there is no defense of what you did. You may have had a 50-plus year legacy of public service, but it ends in total and complete disgrace. So let me ask you an opportunity to answer one question. Will you apologize, just apologize, to the people who you harmed through your actions? Will you say, do you have the dignity to just say you're sorry?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
So you won't apologize to the military members who Joe Biden summarily dismissed from the military for not taking the vaccine?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Will you apologize to the business owners that lost their business, shattered their lives, and they'll never recover?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Will you apologize to the moms who had to force their infant children, 2, 3, 4-year-olds, to put masks on and what that did and how that traumatized those kids?
Under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Will you apologize to the family members of the people who died because they took your advice and not only got the first vaccine, but the 5, 6 other boosters that they did not need?
To answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Will you apologize to that mom from Ohio for being arrested for watching a football game with her family?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
So you didn't know who wrote the Fifth Amendment. It's James Madison. Lived in this town. I can only wonder what he would think of somebody like you invoking his writings to shield culpability for the actions that you took. It's no secret why you have to hire the biggest dirtbag attorney on the planet, because of what you did. I hope you're paying him well. And I hope that one way or the other, somewhere, sometime, you answer for your crimes.
Watching this exchange from beginning to end, one thing becomes immediately clear. This wasn't just another Senate hearing. This was about accountability. It was about whether one of the most recognizable public officials during the COVID-19 pandemic should answer difficult questions about decisions that affected hundreds of millions of Americans. Regardless of where someone stood during the pandemic, there is no denying that those years changed this country forever. Families were separated, businesses closed, schools shut down, churches suspended services. Millions of workers faced vaccine mandates. Children lost valuable years of classroom education. Hospitals implemented unprecedented visitation restrictions. Americans were told where they could go, who they could visit, whether they could work, and in some cases, whether they could earn a living. Those are facts that cannot simply be erased by the passage of time. From my perspective, as someone who values limited government and individual liberty, the central question is simple. When government officials exercise enormous influence over public policy, shouldn't they also be willing to answer difficult questions about those decisions? That is the issue at the heart of this hearing. Senator Moreno began by complimenting Chairman Johnson before turning his attention directly toward Dr. Fauci. Almost immediately, he asked about David Schoen, the high-profile criminal defense attorney who had reportedly been present at the hearing before being removed from the room. Instead of answering, Fauci invoked his Fifth Amendment rights. That alone immediately changed the tone of the hearing. The Fifth Amendment is one of the most important protections found in the United States Constitution. It protects individuals from being compelled to incriminate themselves in criminal proceedings. It is a constitutional right that exists for every American. Senator Moreno then took an unusual approach. Rather than asking about pandemic policies immediately, he simply asked Dr. Fauci if he knew what the Fifth Amendment actually says. Again, no answer. He asked who wrote it. Again, Fauci invoked the Fifth Amendment. Now, it is important to recognize that invoking the Fifth Amendment is a legal right, and courts have long recognized that individuals may invoke it without explaining why. At the same time, in the political arena, repeated refusals to answer questions often become part of the public debate, especially when the witness previously held one of the highest-profile public positions in the country. That distinction matters. A person can legally exercise constitutional rights while lawmakers and the public continue debating what those choices mean politically. Senator Moreno clearly wanted viewers watching the hearing to focus on that contrast. He even had an aide bring over a copy of the Constitution, suggesting that anyone relying upon one of its amendments should understand what it contains. Whether viewers found that moment persuasive or theatrical will largely depend upon their own perspective, but certainly became one of the most memorable moments of the hearing. Moreno then shifted his attention to David Schoen. He pointed out that Schoen has represented several high-profile criminal defendants during his legal career and implied that retaining such a lawyer suggested serious legal concerns. Once again, Fauci declined to answer. As the hearing continued, Moreno broadened the discussion beyond legal questions. He asked members of the audience to stand if they believed they had personally suffered during the pandemic because of government policies. Some stood because they felt they had been criticized for questioning official narratives. Others stood because they opposed mask mandates. Some because they lost jobs over vaccine requirements. Others because they believed prolonged school closures harmed children. Moreno then asked Dr. Fauci to turn around and look at them. Fauci did not respond to the request. From a political standpoint, that was one of the most powerful visual moments of the hearing. Politics often revolves around images as much as words, and Moreno appeared determined to frame the hearing around ordinary Americans who believed they were ignored during the pandemic. Whether every individual policy reference can be attributed directly to Dr. Fauci is a matter of continued public debate. Many pandemic restrictions, including business closures, school closures, and mask enforcement, were implemented by state governors, local governments, school districts, employers, military leadership, and other officials, often using guidance from multiple public health agencies. That broader context is important when evaluating responsibility. Even so, there's no denying that Dr. Fauci became the public face of America's pandemic response. When millions of Americans think back to those years, his face is one of the first they remember. Moreno then told a story about an Ohio family that reportedly attended an outdoor football game during the pandemic and was arrested after refusing to wear masks. He argued that examples like this demonstrated how excessive some pandemic restrictions had become. Whether every enforcement decision made by local authorities reflected federal recommendations remains a subject of debate, but many Americans remember similar stories from across the country involving fines, citations, arrests, or other enforcement actions connected to pandemic rules. This is where the hearing became intensely personal. Moreno said that seeing events like these motivated him to leave private business and run for the United States Senate. That transformed his questioning from a routine oversight hearing into a statement about why he entered politics. He wasn't simply asking questions. He was explaining what he believed had gone wrong in America. Then came perhaps the strongest language of the entire hearing. Moreno accused Fauci of caring more about becoming a celebrity than serving the American people. He argued that Fauci's public legacy had been permanently damaged by the consequences of pandemic-era decisions. That is unquestionably a political opinion expressed by the senator, but it also reflects frustrations that remain widespread among many Americans years after the height of the pandemic. The issue of accountability has never really disappeared. Instead, it has evolved. Initially, the national conversation focused on stopping the spread of COVID-19. Later, it shifted toward reopening schools. Then it became vaccine mandates. Then inflation. Then learning loss. Then mental health. Now, many hearings are looking back and asking whether mistakes were made and what lessons should be learned. Moreno repeatedly asked Fauci whether he would apologize. He mentioned military personnel who were discharged after refusing vaccine requirements, business owners who lost everything, parents whose young children wore masks, families who suffered during the pandemic, the Ohio mother from his earlier story. Each time, Fauci again invoked the Fifth Amendment rather than responding. Legally, he had the right to do so. Politically, those repeated refusals became the defining image of the hearing. As someone who believes deeply in constitutional government, I think accountability matters regardless of political party. If Republicans make mistakes, they should answer questions. If Democrats make mistakes, they should answer questions. If government officials exercise extraordinary influence over the lives of ordinary citizens, transparency should follow. That principle shouldn't change depending upon which administration happens to be in power. The pandemic required governments to make incredibly difficult decisions with incomplete information. Some recommendations undoubtedly saved lives. Others continue to be criticized by researchers, policymakers, and citizens alike. Looking back several years later, Americans are still debating school closures, mask policies, vaccine mandates, economic shutdowns, and public messaging. Those debates are legitimate. Democracy requires them. What many Americans want now is honesty about what worked, what didn't, and what should never happen again. One of the greatest strengths of the American constitutional system is that public officials can be questioned in open hearings before elected representatives. That process doesn't guarantee agreement. It doesn't guarantee every question receives an answer. But it does allow the American people to watch, evaluate, and reach their own conclusions. This hearing illustrated exactly that. Some viewers will believe Fauci simply exercised a constitutional protection available to every citizen. Others will believe his refusal to answer raised additional questions about decisions made during one of the most consequential periods in modern American history. Ultimately, those judgments belong to the American people. What cannot be disputed is that the COVID-19 pandemic changed the nation in profound ways. It reshaped education, healthcare, the economy, politics, public trust, and the relationship between citizens and government. Years later, lawmakers continue examining those events because their consequences are still being felt by millions of families. That is why hearings like this continue attracting enormous public attention. They're not only about revisiting the past, they're also about determining how America should respond when facing future national emergencies. Whatever your political beliefs, accountability, transparency, and constitutional government remain principles worth defending. Thank you for watching Freedom Forge. If you found this analysis informative and want more coverage of congressional hearings, Senate investigations, constitutional debates, and the issues shaping America's future, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe this hearing advanced public accountability, or do you think it was primarily political theater? Let us know your perspective, and we'll see you in the next video.